Namaste, my friends. Welcome to Jack Colley's Black Book. We're on episode 43. And we're going to continue our discussion of a song I wrote called Fred Wept. And last time we looked at two really quick kind of inspirational television news moments that got into this song that I wrote. And one was, in fact, let me show you the picture here. So there's the album cover. So one was James Brock, who poured acid on the swimmers, or in the pool that had swimmers who were civil rights advocates, and they jumped in the pool of the Monson Motor Lodge in 1964 to protest its whites-only policy. And Fred Rogers, years later, would address that in his own way by having this character named Officer Clemens on. And Officer Clemens and Mr. Rogers shared a pool, took off their shoes and socks, and we'll get into some of the symbolism there, and wash their feet together. And so anyway, so there's these couple of different scenes that go into Jack Colley's Fred Wept. So we get to the second bridge in the song, and I'm standing at the sink in this bridge. I'm standing at the sink, and the donut is on the wrong side of the sink because I start to have these visions of wanting to destroy James Brock. So something is bubbling up inside of me. So as much as I want to be a person of peace, as much as I want to, as much as I don't want to think about harming other human beings and what I might do in a different time, in a different space, there is this reality that I struggle with, which is, who may I have been? Who might I have been, a few centuries earlier? Who might I have been if I were born in a different space? And, how does all of that work when I can have all of these thoughts that seem to just go against who I am? And so I'm standing at the sink and I start to kind of visualize, hey, the donut's, the donut's on the wrong side, the donut's on the left side of the sink, and James Brock is floating on it, and I'm visualizing that this is a pool, and the garbage disposal is on the right side of the sink. And so I start thinking to myself, I want to put the donut into the garbage disposal. And obviously I want to put James Brock into the garbage disposal. I want to annihilate him. I want to destroy him. I'm angry in this particular moment at the kitchen sink, not only because of things that happened in my life, but, as I said, I think I was angry at myself for some of the decisions I was making and how I was dealing with hurt in my life. And I wanted to project that, whether James Brock deserved it or not. I probably projected my own anger and my own frustration onto James Brock. He certainly deserved it as well, but you kind of add on to that your own stuff. So anyway, I get out my giant spatula. So here's the second bridge. I get out my giant spatula. I lift the floaty from the pool. Jimmy, he white knuckles it, so he's holding on. Doomed, doomed, doomed. Disintegrating donut. So the donut's now on the side of the sink with the garbage disposal. The faucet is on, if you remember, and that is symbolizing acid rain, which is paralleling the acid that he poured in the pool. Disintegrating donut, mushy, mushy, burn, burn. I wish I didn't have these thoughts. And this is like, I don't know, it's kind of like an internal battle of mine that sometimes these thoughts come into my head and I just think, where the hell did that come from? Like, that's just ridiculously out there. That's nothing that I could ever be capable of doing. At least I tell myself that. And yet when I really think about what we are capable of as human beings in different times and different spaces, and even in current time and current spaces, it's really quite sobering to think of what people are capable of. And I think we have to be aware of our own potential pitfalls and how we may be led to these really dark spaces where we do harm. I think if we pretend that it would never happen to us, I don't know, part of me says I'd rather be aware and admit and kind of acknowledge that sometimes these really dark thoughts come up in my mind. And I read it on social media, a criminal, somebody does something and somebody's like, give him the electric chair, or, oh, just, give me 5 minutes in his cell. And it's all of this violence begetting violence begetting violence. And sometimes I wonder, where that comes from. So anyway, I wish I didn't have these thoughts. He'll get his just desserts. My fantasy takes off. And then, as Jimmy Brock is being pushed down into the garbage disposal on his donut, I'm thinking to myself, I don't need him. We don't need James Brock. We don't need him. We don't need him, but he'll be born again. And so there's this idea that we keep trying to get rid of racism. We keep trying to get rid of violence. We keep trying to get rid of all of these things, and yet they keep coming up in different forms. Like we can just never seem to completely get rid of them. And I'm not sure what that is about. I think the Hindu religion does a much better job of helping me understand what that might be about, certainly than the Christian religion, which I don't think does enough to address things like this level of violence, but or pouring acid on other human beings because of their skin color. My fantasy. So we don't need him, but he'll be born again. And I was thinking of the spirit of James Brock, this racism, this racist spirit, and how, as particularly with the history of this country, we keep trying to get rid of it, but it keeps coming up in some of the most horrific ways. And in my mind, part of this was, part of my frustration was that there was a lot of media drawing attention to police officers shooting unarmed black men. And I am going to specifically focus on that particular type of violence, because I don't want to get into the politics of all the gray areas and, this statistic versus this statistic. I want to focus on situations where well-armed police officers basically execute unarmed black men, young men who are unarmed, and how that is a show of racism. I mean, that is racist. I'm surprised that people argue that that's not racism when this is happening. And I say he'll be born again. So we don't need James Brock. We don't need racism, but it's going to be born again. And this time it's inside the pigs, behind the guns, pressed to the backs of young black men. And then I have this little tag that says, it's so American, because I think that a lot of this is specific to our culture for some reason, to American culture. For some reason, it's specific. You just don't see school shootings. You don't see the level of gun ownership. You don't see people able to, without even any critique or critical thought of saying, oh, I love Jesus, but oh, I love my guns too. It just doesn't even make sense to me. It's very difficult to reconcile. But then at the same time, it's like I'm standing at the sink and I'm having these violent thoughts. And so I end this particular part of the song with, the song almost stops. So you give it a listen if you can. But I'm surprised. I realized, it's like I stopped. I realized how surprised I am that thoughts could fill my mind of killing my own kind. Hello, my name is God, and vengeance is mine. And so that kind of ends this part of the song before we get to kind of the epilogue of the song, which we'll discuss next time. But I think that we have to start drawing attention to the violent parts of ourselves. I think we have to start acknowledging that when you look at the evil that men do, that evil could be within us. And it might sound nice to everybody say, hey, we're not going to do this. No, I would never do that. And yet at the same time, it's continuing to happen, and it's continuing to come up in places. And I think if you can be aware that, given different circumstances, you may be that violent person. And to be aware of that, maybe on some level, helps me to guard against even going down that path. I don't have all of this figured out. I mean, these are just ideas that I'm throwing out there, but there's something about Rabbi Jesus's insistence to be nonviolent. There's something about that leads me to believe that Jesus understood something about violence begetting violence, about violence transforming exponentially into more violence, and why we have to take a very firm stand against violence. And again, I don't want to get into like different countries' governments and how the evil and protection, and like, I understand that we have to have the military. I understand that we have to have the police. I understand that there has to be things in place, but I also at the same time, want to acknowledge that if I have this belief system over here, and I'm putting myself in a position where I have, where I may potentially have to harm another human being, I have to really consider what I'm doing and how I'm living my life in that particular moment. So there you go. I hope that made sense. Sometimes I just kind of go with the flow, and things come out, and then I watch these again a little bit later, and it's like, okay, yeah, I did. Hopefully I made sense, but hopefully that's not too confusing. But as I try to figure things out, hopefully along with other people and everybody else. So, all right. Namaste, my friends, and I will see you next time.